joining us this morning. My name is Judith Dittman. I'm the CEO here at Second Story, and really appreciate your taking time out of your day to do one of our learning series with us. This one is on Reconnecting Generation COVID, and we are very honored to have Ann Kim, who is the author of Abandoned, America's Lost Youth and the Crisis of Disconnection. And I happen to have a copy, which Zoom wants to blur for me. But it's a great book. It was published in 2020. And I had the great pleasure of talking with Ann several times before the publication of the book about what we were seeing with young people in our programs at Second Story. And there's actually information included in her book on our Second Story for Young Mothers program. So if you have a chance, I highly recommend it. It is a compelling read, and I'm sure goes further into what we'll be covering today, the disconnection of youth. Ann is going to lead us in our discussion, but we also have with us this morning Cathy Benn, who is the Vice President of Residential Services for Second Story, and is the person in charge of the Second Story for Young Mothers program and Second Story for Homeless Youth, as well as Second Story for Teens in Crisis. Also on our Zoom meeting today is Soraya Borja, and she is our Vice President of Community-Based Services and oversees a myriad of programs, including family resource centers and after-school programs for disadvantaged youth, is working with the health department to provide preventative health and vaccinations for underserved communities. So two very powerful women also in their own right. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Ann, and thank you so much for joining us, Ann.
Oh, thank you so much, Judith. And I really do want to thank Second Story for the privilege of speaking this morning. I actually first met Judith back in 2018 when I attended one of Second Story's open houses. I hadn't yet finished the manuscript for my book, and I was learning a lot about the challenges facing young adults, but I hadn't yet found any answers. But that's because I hadn't yet found Second Story. Judith's open house really turned me into a true believer. And as she mentioned, I ended up writing about Second Story in the book. In fact, there's pretty much an entire chapter that's dedicated to Second Story's programs. And in particular, I focus on one of the graduates, a young woman named Carla. So if you read that chapter, Carla came to Second Story as a teenage mom. She'd been experiencing homelessness, and with the help of Second Story, she ended up becoming a homeowner and has a terrific job and a family. And when you learn more about Carla, you can really see how her story exemplifies the power of the kind of work the Second Story does. And I think it also really shows the potential that every young person has to succeed, provided that they get the right resources and support. So when my book came out in 2020, that was pre-pandemic actually, and there were already far too many young people with experiences like Carla's. In 2019, there were more than 4 million young adults between the ages of 16 and 24. That's 11% of all young people who are not in school, not working, not participating in the mainstream economy. And then the pandemic hit. So if what we had then was a crisis, I think what we're facing now is really a catastrophe. So what I want to talk about today is why places like Second Story are just so much more important than ever. And I also want to talk about the scale of the national challenge we have to put young Americans back on track after COVID. And then after that, I'll turn things over to the team at Second Story, and you can hear what is happening right here in Fairfax County to reconnect young adults. So let me share my screen here. It goes without saying that the last couple of years have been just incredibly difficult for all of us. It's really going to take us a long time to process the collective trauma that we've all experienced. But I do think that young adults have faced some pretty unique burdens, and I do think they're going to need some unique solutions as we head, hopefully, fingers crossed, into a national recovery over the next few months. I don't want to bombard everyone with a lot of numbers, but I do want to share a handful of statistics that I think help give a sense of what we're up against. So starting with basics. How big is this problem of youth disconnection and why is it a problem? So, as I mentioned, pre-pandemic, there were already more than 4 million young adults who had, stopped participating in the mainstream economy, not in school, not working. The pandemic really blew up those numbers. 2020, there were an estimated 9 million young people who'd either lost their jobs and or dropped out of school. That's 1 in 4 young adults. And just for context, that's also 8 times the population of Fairfax County. So we don't know yet what those numbers are today, but some of the research I see says the number is closer to 6 million, which is considerably worse than it was during the Great Recession. And when you think about the millennials who graduated into the Great Recession, their lifelong financial trajectories have really been pretty scarred. They earn less and they got a later start in their careers than the generations preceding them, compared to boomers and Gen X like me. They become homeowners later in life. They have less in savings. So, given their experience, what we're potentially looking at with the COVID generation is really an order of magnitude beyond that. And disconnected young adults are already vulnerable. They're likely to be living in poverty. They likely lack access to healthcare. Many of them are parenting. Many don't have the education and skills to get them successfully through adulthood because of the hand they've been dealt. I'll give you an example of one young man I met while researching my book. His name was Trevor, and I met him at a drop-in center for young people experiencing homelessness in DC. If you're not familiar with what a drop-in center offers, it's basically a place for young people to hang out, grab a sandwich, get a shower, meet with a case manager. A lot of young people actually have their mail sent to drop-in center because they otherwise don't have an address. So in Trevor's situation, he had been raised by a grandmother, and he lost his housing when she suddenly passed away. He had been pretty stable up to that point. He'd been taking classes at UDC. That had to pause as well when he lost his housing. And when I met him, he was trying to make money working retail at a Blue Mercury store on Connecticut Avenue in downtown. He definitely wasn't making enough to afford his own place or go back to school, which is why he was at that drop-in center for help. So I think the pandemic has meant that there are a lot more young people in Trevor's situation. And we're probably actually looking at 4 separate crises of disconnection. First is disconnection from school, including especially college. Disconnection from work as a result of the pandemic. Disconnection from community as young people have lost ties with those closest to them after months and now years really of isolation, and disconnection from family, just from the toll that COVID has taken. It's really going to take us years to unpack what all of this means, but we do know a few things that are deeply concerning about the impact of the pandemic on young adults that should set some alarm bells ringing for all of us. So, for one thing, Generation COVID is not pursuing higher education. They're not going to college. There are 1 million fewer young people in college, students in college today than there were in 2019. And that's got some pretty profound implications for our future economy. And the students not enrolling are disproportionately students of color, low-income students, and young men. And all of that, I think, in turn, has pretty deep implications for inequality, social and societal inequality. Here in Virginia, enrollment has actually been shrinking at 9 of the state's 15 public colleges. Not talking about UVA. UVA is doing great, but VCU is not doing great. Radford is not doing great. Nova is not doing great. Enrollment at Nova is down 5% since pre-pandemic. And if you cross the river into Montgomery County Community College is actually down 19% in terms of their enrollment. And you see this ripple effect to K-12 as well. Fairfax County Public Schools have lost 10,000 students between 2019 and 2021. So that's a 5% decline. And yeah, some of this might be kids going to private school, but a good chunk of this is probably kids who just left during lockdown and just haven't come back. Not getting post-secondary education or really any education means we're really increasing the risk of a generation of young adults, young people who are disconnected from opportunities and run the risk of a lifetime of financial insecurity. If you have a post-secondary degree or a 4-year degree in particular, your earnings are going to be about triple that of someone with a high school diploma. Two, young adults aren't working, which means they're not getting the work experience they need to set themselves up for the world of work. Young adults are stereotypically the last hired, first fired, and that definitely happened when the pandemic hit. Young people made up about a third of all the low-wage workers who were displaced by the pandemic, and low-wage workers do tend to be disproportionately young adults. The problem here is that as hot as the economy seems to be right now, a lot of the jobs that have been lost have not come back, and they may never come back. The pandemic really accelerated trends like automation. And even now, when you have worker shortages, employers still want workers who have some sort of higher education, perhaps, and experience. The unemployment rate right now for young people is still double that for older workers over 25. Third crisis of disconnection we've got to contend with is the emotional disconnection and trauma that the pandemic has inflicted on today's young adults. We really have a crisis in youth mental health that's going on right now that's pretty much going unaddressed. The isolation of COVID has meant a lot of young people have lost touch with not just friends, but teachers, coaches, mentors, the adults in their lives who would otherwise be helping them navigate what should be the biggest transition they could be making in their lives to independence. So as a result, what we're seeing is really high levels of mental health crises. There was a recent survey that Harvard University did where 61% of young adults that they surveyed said they felt lonely frequently or most or all the time. The CDC survey that I note here in the slide reported that nearly 2/3 of young adults, 63%, have felt some levels of high levels of anxiety and depression. And then on top of all of this, you have an estimated 200,000 children who've lost a caregiver to COVID as a course of the pandemic. For young adults, this kind of really unthinkable trauma also means that they could be stepping up into that caregiver role themselves if they have younger siblings at home. We don't actually know at this point how many young adults have been orphaned, or have had to take on new parenting responsibilities. But I suspect that those numbers, when we have them, are going to be pretty staggering. So how do we fix this? And yes, I think all of this really is fixable if we decide to make it a priority. 4 things we can do. The first is really to fix the systemic barriers to opportunity that existed before COVID. Nothing's changed. Disconnection affects young people of color in particular disproportionately. That was true pre-COVID, it is more so today. This is a manifestation, disconnection is a manifestation of systemic inequities in who gets access to opportunity and who gets to succeed. One of the most disheartening numbers I found in my research is that a young person who is Black is almost 3 times as likely to be disconnected from work and from school as a young person who is white. And if you're looking at young Black men, 1 in 5, 20% is disconnected. So equity has got to come first. Next, we can invest a lot more in young people than we currently do. In 2019, the federal government spent about $2.5 billion on programs aimed at reconnecting youth. That's compared to $892 billion we spent on Social Security benefits for retirees. So of course, I'm not saying we shouldn't help seniors. I mean, of course we should, but we could probably use a little bit more balance in how government spends, its dollars. How we spend our money is a reflection of our priorities, right? And another reason to do this return on investment, the lifetime cost of a disconnected young person becoming a disconnected adult is about $700,000 over that person's lifetime. That's lost revenues from wages that are never earned, plus a variety of government expenditures, Medicaid, welfare, and in some cases, incarceration. Next, we've got to fix some broken government policies that are kind of functioning as engines of disconnection. And here I'm talking about child welfare, criminal justice, homelessness policy, which Judith and the team at Second Story can also speak more about. The outcomes for young adults aging out of foster care, for instance, are absolutely horrific. the lack of transition services for young adults who are aging out are, in particular, very, very lacking. So I'll give you an example. At the same drop-in center where I met the young man, Trevor, that I mentioned earlier, while I was there, the manager got this emergency call from a social worker in DC who was looking frantically for somewhere to send one of her clients that night. So her client was a young woman who was about to have a birthday, so she was aging out, and the services were ending like the next day, but they still hadn't sorted out her housing. And mind you, they probably had years to work with this young woman, but this was the crisis point in which they were at. And that happens far too often. And you have, tragically, as a result, very few young adults who age out of foster care with the support and resources that they need to help them succeed. And few, as you can see from the figures here, actually end up escaping poverty. And then there's criminal justice, incredibly damaging system for young adults. Young people in detention often get zero access to education. 2/3 drop out of school. They don't ever go back. Many young people are also often treated like adults in a criminal justice system when they're not, which means they're thrown in with much older inmates, and that makes them vulnerable to all sorts of abuse. Homelessness policy. And this is something that Second Story team can speak to, as I said, much more eloquently than I can, because it affects their work much more directly. Bottom line is that the federal definition of who is, quote, homeless doesn't actually take into account how young people experience it. Young adults don't go to homeless shelters, adult shelters, because it's simply too dangerous. They couch surf. They get shelter where they can. And according to one fairly recent survey by Chapin Hall out of University of Chicago, 1 in 10 young adults had experienced homelessness over the course of a year. Somewhere on the street, but also sleeping in cars, couch surfing. Carla, the young woman I mentioned at the top of the presentation, she never went to an adult shelter, and I don't believe that she ever had to sleep outside. But she did tell me that she slept in the closet of her boyfriend's mother's house, and stayed with others as she could. She was experiencing homelessness. But as far as the federal government concerned, that didn't count. So the consequence is that homelessness among young people ends up being vastly underestimated. And that in turn means the young people experiencing homelessness don't get the resources they deserve because the government literally doesn't see the problem. So one easy fix, you would think, is just to redefine homelessness so that young adults get the services they need. Final step. We really do need to ensure that all young adults have access to the resources they need to succeed. And that comes down to 3 things. 1, meeting basic needs, a place to stay, something to eat, clothes to wear. 2, access to education and work opportunities. That means a decent high school education as well as affordable access to college. It also means access to internships, apprenticeships, work experience. And 3rd, ensuring the presence of caring adults, mentors who can help young people navigate the big decisions they have about their futures, particularly if their parents are not in a position to provide that kind of support. All 3 of these elements, I think, are very central to how Second Story approaches its work. So I think that's the right segue to transition to the Second Story team to talk about what all this looks like in practice right here in Fairfax County.
Cathy, Soraya, anyone wants volunteer to go first?
Sure, I'll start. Thank you, Anne. That was an amazing condensing of all of the issues that we see every day, and I'll just echo that. I wanted to shake my head vigorously over everything that Anne was saying. We are seeing just huge challenges with the pandemic. Obviously, these challenges were all started long before that, or we wouldn't exist. But a lot of the same issues of, there being a lot of young people out there struggling and not knowing who to reach out to. We have increased our outreach because at least a lot of our school age youth have been connected through the schools, and we work closely in partnerships with the schools. But when everything shut down with the pandemic, it was a lot harder for young people to access our services. So our outreach had to change, and also, the young people that were in our programs were losing jobs and being disconnected from the people that they were supporting. Some of them lived, we use a lot of renting rooms in other people's houses, and some of our young people did have relationships with the families that they were living with, and that was a good resource for them. But still, disconnected from school is a huge issue for our young people. We did start paying our landlords more money because we were, it was hard during the pandemic for landlords to agree to have a stranger in their house, right? But everyone was shutting down. So it's hard to find places for our young people to live. So we did start paying more for landlords so that they would work with us. We also had to increase support because our young people lost jobs and weren't going to school. And so we were having to support them more with food, cleaning supplies, testing kits, taking them to get vaccinated, things like that. We also had to increase our check-ins. We did see and are seeing a lot more anxiety, depression, trauma reactions from their past trauma resurfacing. So we've had to, we've increased our mental health support and check-ins with our young people. And I think you're right, Anne. I don't think we've seen the height of that yet. I think we're going to see a lot more of that in the fallout from the pandemic in the future. But we are trying to reach out more and provide more supports. And of course, one of our biggest, prime directives, if you will, is permanent connections. We are tasked with trying to support our youth and get them connected to caring adults. So, it's harder it was harder during the pandemic. It's getting better now. We're trying new ways of not just getting our young people to meet each other and realize that they're not alone and that there are other young people in the same boat, but also trying to get them reconnected to school and reconnecting to work and internships so that they can get training programs and work experience. And, that we're hoping that will help them re-engage. And then also, working with other agencies to try and increase our access to young people in need, but also, working together to get services to the young people in need. So that's just a few of the things that we're trying to do to answer this the problem that's out there, and we're meeting together frequently to brainstorm new ideas and go out to talk with our partner agencies and other folks that are doing this work to try and figure out how we can do things better to meet the young people where they are. So I hope that answers some.
Cathy, and also I would like to share the experiences that we have at the community-based services. It was hard for us because we had to close the after-school programs, and also at the beginning we had to close the Culmer Resource Center, the Springfield Resource Center. So since we serve to the community and to the different students in the area, it was hard for us. But then after we opened again our programs, doing Zoom meetings to our children, and we were continuing with doing the same groups that we used to do before. We knew that it was important to do to reconnect with the kids, but also to serve them in a way that, they they needed to have that connection again with us. So our coordinators, they did home visits, and thanks to the grant that we received for the distributions, the coordinators used to bring the food to their houses, and to take advantage of that, also to hear from them what was their needs. We used to support the youth outside of the homes, looking at their homeworks, and then after, when the school were able to give them the computers, and also we did receive some laptops. We provide some laptops to some of the children, so it was easier for us to connect through email. Some of the families, they didn't have access to internet, so we did some phone calls to connect them, to have them with the internet service. So it was hard at the beginning, but then, as I said before, we were trying to connect the children with the services. In our community resource centers, we opened, and we were doing by appointments and also by phone calls, serving the community. We were doing, and we still do that, food distributions on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And I remember having every Tuesdays and Thursdays, like 300 people coming for food, because even the prices increase, and so many parents and community members, they lost their jobs. So it was hard for our families, especially because some of them, they don't have documents. It was harder. I mean, it is harder for them because they cannot have access to other kind of jobs, to have opportunities working at home, like online. They needed to still working, in person. So some of them, they just lost their jobs. So, but these food distributions for them, as some parents said, they have tell us, this is so much help for us because we have enough money to pay the rent. But having this food at home twice a week, it helps me to provide to my families at least with food, which is important. Another thing that we have been doing is, after we need that we knew that it was the need of having equity vaccines to our community. So in our centers in Springfield and in Fulmar, we start with the equity vaccines for adults and for children, and we're continue doing that. And especially for community members that they don't have any transportation to go to, places that they were waiting, that they have the vaccine. So we thought that it was important to implement that in our centers for the communities, just to have access and to have equity on having the vaccine. Also with the teen center, for example, we have the support of counselors that they were doing their internship. So we did have, we continue doing mental health individual, and also we are doing groups for the children, because we saw that they were having a lot of mental health issues. A lot of our clients, they live in places that they have to share with other families because of the prices of the rent. So it was hard for them to stay at home with, probably 10 more people in small places. Before they used to come to the teen center, having fun, to have their safe place there, play games with other teams. So we thought, and we saw that they had a lot of mental health issues. So we have been working on that with them. Also, we start doing the field trips that they love, you know, going to parks, taking them to opportunities that they need. For instance, we reconnect with one organization that I have here. So with empower them, that they were able to support them looking for employment. You know, we visit their place, and it was great for our children to see that, you know, they still have the support from Second Story. Also, in the past month, we have two town halls. The first was for the adults, and we wanted to hear from the community what were it was a safety town hall, because it was, we have seen an increase of insecurity on the streets. After the director of the Opportunity Neighborhood with the community ambassadors, we host town hall on security, and then we hear the voice of the community. Maybe about, you know, the security, they were concerned not having lights at night when they're coming from work. They wanted the police to be around after the school, so if there is any problem with the students, like having, it was a lot of fights after the school when the children, they were coming, when the youth were coming to their houses. It was fights on the streets, so they were asking to have more security on the streets. Also, some parents, they said that because in the winter is dark, they wanted the police to be around because it was dark and the children, they had to be by themselves on the bus stops. So it was great to hear from the community, because that gave us an idea of what else we have to do to support our communities. We did the same town hall with the youth, and also we hear from them. They were talking about bullying in schools. They were talking about the selling of drugs in the schools. They were talking about depression. So, you know, that was a great thing to hear the voice of our youth. And for that reason, also, we have organized the Youth Council, which is a group of children, of youth, that they hear that we have sessions for our other teenagers, and you know, they organize groups. They hear from the voice of other teams, and then from there, you know, we are organizing like activities for the with the youth, which they want more field trips. Also, they want more support with mental health. Also, they want to have more activities that will connect them with scholarships. They want to hear about the information of school. So now we are planning, and as we did before COVID, we used to take the kids to different colleges to do tours. So now we want to implement that again, now that, you know, everything is more now, the situation is better with COVID. So we want to implement again the to do before. But as I said before, having hearing from the youth and the community members, that gave us a best idea of how to improve, and also how to continue with the things that we have been doing. Thank you. That was. If you have any questions, please.
Thank you. Let's see. Thank you. And thank you. Can you hear me? Am I muted? No. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box, and I'd be happy to read them off so that we can have our presenters answer them during the session.
If I could just tag on one short thing. I think it was really, to me, it brought it all together, hearing Cathy and Soraya detail all the things that they had been doing really prior to the pandemic, trying to help get youth connected, who either were disconnected or who were at risk of becoming that way. You know, the thing about Second Story is we don't just work with young people when they have, fallen on hard times, call it that. But when they're in crisis, we're also there trying to step in and keep youth connected so that we don't have to go down the road of providing housing, of providing basic living supplies, of providing emergency shelter. And I think that one thing that the pandemic brought about was an increase in thinking outside of the box. How can we make that happen? What can we do differently? We don't have to do it the same way we always did. And one of the focuses that we're coming to here at Second Story is how critical education is, how critical it is to connect with school, to finish high school, to go on to college or job training or some sort of higher education that will allow our young people to move on from just subsistence wages, but to be able to be fully contributing members of the community. And that's really difficult in Fairfax County and Northern Virginia and the DC metro area. It is so expensive to live here that we're losing some very promising young people from our community because they're moving somewhere where it's less expensive to live. So if we can give them that ability to stay here, to stay connected, to contribute to our community, I think we'll all win. And one of the things that inspires me is the forward thinkingness that I see from everybody at Second Story, as we don't look just to solve the problem of today, but work on how to make it better tomorrow. And I think you heard that in what Cathy and Soraya talked about are doing, and it just emphasized what Anne was saying as the points of disconnection that she sees with youth and how we're trying to address it.
Thank you. I have the chat box open if you have any questions. We have still about 5 minutes left of the presentation, so don't be shy. Let us know if you want to, and I'm trying to get this to speak. Okay. Well, if we don't have any questions, there will be opportunities to connect after the session as well. So before I let you all go, I just want to say thank you to Anne, Cathy, Soraya, Judith. We really appreciate you all taking part in this and covering this important topic. And I also want to invite you all to attend our open door sessions that we host every month, where you'll learn a little bit more about all of the programs that we have and some of the issues that we are seeing from the young people that we work with in the community. And so we have, I know in the chat box, a link to register. You can always go to our website as well. And to stay connected to the work that we're doing, we do post updates on what's happening in our programs, occasionally stories, some of the needs that we have here at Second Story on our social media. So all of the handle is also in the chat box. And we will follow up with you all after the session with an email to cover all of this again and to give you the opportunity to ask more questions if you think of any after the session. I just want to say thank you all so much for being a part of this. And we will hopefully connect again soon. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.